What if I told you that one of the most disciplined, fanatically organized, and terrifying armies in Europe was destroyed not by brute force or numerical superiority, but by brilliant intrigue? It was not swords that changed the course of history, but human overconfidence, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. On July 15, 1410, on the fields near the village of Grunwald, it was not just two armies that clashed. It was a collision of two worlds, the icy, almost machine-like discipline of the Teutonic Order and the united, furious power of the Slavic and Lithuanian lands. But steel was not the decisive factor. It was a plan, subtle, calculated, and executed with a precision that one would not expect from medieval chaos. Watch the video to the end to find out exactly how this deceptive maneuver was carried out, why the knights took the carefully executed plan for their triumphant victory, and how that day marked the beginning of the end for the powerful Teutonic Order, which considered itself invincible. What if I told you that everything the Teutonic Knights believed in led them straight into a trap? The Teutonic Order was not just an army. It was a corporate state built on war and ideology. Their white cloaks with black crosses were a symbol of unshakable strength and discipline throughout Europe. They were considered invincible in open field battles. Their reputation was forged by decades of campaigns against pagans, and every knight was a professional warrior who had dedicated his entire life to this cause. This military monastic order had enormous resources gathered from throughout the Holy Roman Empire and other Catholic lands. They were supported by the Pope, and the European aristocracy considered it an honor to send their sons to serve under their banners. They were the elite of Christian knighthood, hardened by constant conflicts on the borders of the Christian world. Their power was based on a strict hierarchy and iron discipline that left no room for doubt. The capital of their state was Marienburg Castle, or Malbork, the greatest brick fortress in the world. This castle was not just the residence of the Grand Master, it was a symbol of their power, wealth, and indestructibility. The Order controlled vast lands, engaged in trade, and had its own economy, which was completely subordinate to military needs. They were confident in their right to use force to spread their faith and expand their possessions. Their military doctrine was honed to perfection. Heavy knightly cavalry, formed into perfect wedges, was capable of breaking through any formation. They used advanced technology for the time, including artillery. Their tactics were straightforward but extremely effective. Find the enemy, close in, and crush them with a single powerful blow, without wasting time on minor skirmishes. By 1410, the order was headed by Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen. He was an experienced warrior, but like many of his fellow knights, he despised his opponents. He considered the army of the Polish king Jogaila to be a rabble, and the Lithuanians led by Prince Vytautas to be unreliable semi-pagans, incapable of withstanding the blow of real knights. This self-confidence was their Achilles' heel. It was this arrogance that became the first element of the trap. The Order's strategists could not imagine that the enemy would dare not only to accept battle, but also to impose their own rules on them. They expected another border conflict or a long siege, but not a general battle where everything would be at stake. They went into this war expecting an easy victory. They did not know that they were facing not just an army, but an alliance of two nations united by a common threat. Polish King Władysław Jagiełło and his cousin, Grand Duke of Lithuania Vytautas, had been preparing this strike for a long time and carefully. They gathered forces unprecedented in this part of Europe, and they had a plan. The Teutonic Knights, accustomed to victory, did not see the difference between bravery and recklessness. They themselves craved this battle, hoping to end the Polish-Lithuanian threat with a single blow. They were confident that their discipline and experience would outweigh any numbers the enemy could field. On the eve of the battle, their camp was filled with confidence bordering on arrogance. They were preparing for another glorious victory that would go down in the annals of the Order. They had no idea that they were going to the fields near Grunwald to play the leading role in a carefully planned spectacle, the finale of which would be fatal for them. The events that unfolded on July 15th would become not just a battle, but a demonstration of how intelligence and cunning can overcome brute force. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about such self-confidence? Was it justified by the Order's previous successes? Write about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next episodes. Are you ready to learn the truth about how two sworn enemies joined forces to crush a common enemy? The force that opposed the Teutonic Order was unique. It consisted of two huge armies belonging to two rulers whose relationship was full of intrigue and conflict: King Władysław II, Jagiełło of Poland, and Grand Duke Vytautas of Lithuania. They were cousins who spent most of their lives fighting each other for power and influence. Jagiełło, the former Grand Duke of Lithuania who became King of Poland through marriage, was a strategist. He was cautious, calculating, and preferred to play it safe. He understood that this war was not just another border dispute, but a battle for the very existence of his kingdom and his Lithuanian homeland. He was willing to risk everything, but only on condition of thorough preparation. Vytautas, his cousin, was the complete opposite. He was energetic, ambitious, and a brilliant tactician who was not afraid to take risks. He spent years fighting on the side of the Order against Jogaila, then on the side of Jogaila against the Order. He knew the habits of the Teutonic Knights like no one else, and, most importantly, he was not bound by the codes of chivalry as understood in Europe. Their combined army was incredibly diverse. The core of the Polish forces was heavy knightly cavalry, which was on a par with the Teutonic Knights. These were Polish nobles, the Szlachta, for whom battle was a matter of honor. In addition to them, there were detachments of mercenaries, including the famous Czech warriors led by the future hero Jan Žižka. The Lithuanian army was even more diverse. It included not only Lithuanian boyars, but also troops from Russian lands that were part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, such as the Smolensk regiments. The key element that Vytautas brought with him was light cavalry, including a contingent of Tatar horsemen led by Khan Jalal ad-Din. These warriors brought with them the tactics of steppe warfare. Uniting these two armies was a titanic task. Polish knights, accustomed to heavy frontal attacks, and light Lithuanian Tatar horsemen, who relied on maneuvering and archery, fought in completely different ways. Jogaila was responsible for overall strategy and resources, while Vytautas was responsible for tactical maneuvers and coordination of the diverse forces. The problem was not only military doctrine, but also logistics. Gathering, feeding, and quietly moving such a huge army through forests and rivers to the heart of enemy territory was an unprecedented task. Teutonic spies were everywhere, and any leak of information could lead to disaster. The war plan was bold. Instead of invading the Order's territories one by one, as had been done before, the Allies decided to join forces and deliver one crushing blow. They had to force the Order to accept a general battle on their terms. It was a risk because defeat in such a battle would mean the end for both Poland and Lithuania. The very fact that Jogaila and Vytautas were able to overcome their personal differences for the sake of a common goal was already a great diplomatic victory. They understood that individually, the Order would crush them one by one. Only together, combining Polish heavy cavalry and Lithuanian maneuverability, did they have a chance. This army was not just an alliance of two states. It was the response of the Slavic and Baltic world to the centuries-long expansion of German knighthood. Catholic Poles, newly baptized Lithuanians, Orthodox warriors from the Smolensk lands, and even Muslim Tatars stood shoulder to shoulder. They all went into battle against a common enemy. How difficult do you think it was to command such a multinational army with different tactics in the chaos of a medieval battle? But assembling an army is only half the battle. How could tens of thousands of soldiers and horses be secretly ferried across a wide river right under the enemy's nose? In the next chapter, I will reveal the secret of the unique pontoon bridge that was the key to the surprise attack. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the preparations for Grunwald. The success of the entire campaign depended on one critical element: surprise. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen expected an attack, but he did not know where or when it would happen. He spread his forces thin to defend key fortresses, confident that the Allied army would move slowly and predictably, likely laying siege to border castles. Jogailo and Vytautas understood this. Their plan was to bypass the fortresses and march swiftly to the Order's capital, Marienburg, forcing the Grand Master to gather all his forces and give battle. But standing in the way of the Allied army was the wide and fast-flowing Vistula River. Crossing such an obstacle in full view of the enemy would be disastrous. A bridge was needed, but building one would immediately reveal the direction of the attack. And here Jogaila used a military trick that was unheard of at the time. A few months before the campaign, in strict secrecy, in the forests far from the border, Polish engineers under the leadership of Master Yaroslav began construction. They were not building an ordinary bridge, but a prefabricated pontoon bridge. It was a series of ready-made sections built on boats that could be quickly delivered to the desired location. All work was carried out in strict secrecy. To conceal the true purpose of these works, rumors were spread about the construction of siege engines or logging operations. No one in the Order suspected that the Poles were preparing something like this. It was a technological and logistical operation of incredible scale. When the combined army approached the Vistula River near the town of Chervinsk, sections of the bridge were delivered by river. Before the eyes of the astonished army, engineers assembled a sturdy bridge about half a kilometer long in a matter of hours. Tens of thousands of soldiers, wagons, and artillery crossed this bridge to the other side. It was a marvel of medieval engineering. The Teutonic spies were confused. When the news reached the master that the entire Allied army was already on his bank, he was shocked. He did not expect such speed and audacity. He had to hastily order all his forces to gather in one place to intercept the Allies. But Jogaila and Vytautas did not stop. Immediately after the crossing, the bridge was dismantled to cut off their retreat and show the army that there was no turning back. Now they were moving through the territory of the Order. To further confuse the enemy, the Allies used the tactic of fog of war. Light Lithuanian and Tatar cavalry rode ahead, creating a smokescreen and destroying small Order patrols, preventing them from gathering information about the size and direction of the main army. The march itself was an extremely difficult ordeal. Tens of thousands of people moved through forests and swamps, trying to maintain order and speed. Jogailo and Vytautas constantly held military councils, coordinating the movement of the two armies. They knew exactly where they were going, to the flat fields between the villages of Grunwald, Tannenberg, and Ludwigsdorf. They themselves chose the site of the future battle. This secret march and the ingenious decision to build a pontoon bridge completely deprived Ulrich von Jungingen of the initiative. He was no longer the hunter. He had become the prey. He had to abandon his own defense plan and rush to meet the enemy in order to protect his capital. He led his army, confident in its superiority, but he had already lost the strategic phase of the war. The Allies arrived first. They took up an advantageous position on a hill at the edge of the forest, which gave them cover and a good view. They set up camp, and waited. Now the Order, exhausted by their hasty march, had to attack an army that was ready for battle and waiting for them in a position of their own choosing. The psychological advantage was entirely on the side of the Allies. If you like how strategic cunning can decide the outcome of a war before it even begins, give this video a thumbs up. What if I told you that the most famous battle in Polish history began with one of the most arrogant gestures in the history of warfare? On the morning of July 15, 1410, two armies stood facing each other. The allied Polish-Lithuanian forces took up position on the eastern hill, their flanks covered by forests and swamps. They were in the shade, which gave them respite from the scorching July sun. They were in no hurry. Opposite them, in the open field, stood the iron ranks of the Teutonic Order. The knights and their horses, clad in heavy armor, stood under the open sky. The sun beat down mercilessly, heating their armor. Hours passed, but the Allies did not launch their attack. Jogaila and Vytautas deliberately waited. They knew that time was on their side. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen was furious. He had brought his army to battle, not to stand in the scorching sun. His knights were losing patience and strength. This was psychological pressure. Jogaila, a cautious strategist, even pitched his campaign tent and listened to mass, demonstrating complete calm. Unable to bear this passive waiting any longer, von Jungingen resorted to provocation. He sent two heralds to the Polish king. They carried two naked swords before them. It was a gesture full of knightly contempt. The heralds declared that the Grand Master was sending these swords to King Jogaila and Prince Vytautas to help them finally gather their courage and come out of the forest into the open field for an honest fight. This act went down in history as a symbol of Teutonic arrogance. Von Jungingen tried to hurt Jogaila's honor, provoking him into a rash attack on the Order's prepared positions. He believed that the Night King would not be able to endure such an insult and would throw his army into a frontal attack. Jogaila, however, was not only a knight, but also a wise politician. He calmly accepted the swords, saying that he accepted them as a sign of victory that God would send him. He did not succumb to provocation. This restraint finally threw the Grand Master off balance. Realizing that his psychological attack had failed, von Jungingen made a decision that largely determined the course of the battle. He decided to move his army. To force the Allies out of the forest, he ordered his troops to retreat slightly and regroup in a higher but more exposed position. This maneuver was a mistake. First, it further exhausted the knights, who had to move their entire heavy line in the heat. Second, it signaled to the Allies that the enemy was nervous and losing the initiative. Vytautas and Jogaila saw their chance. While the Teutonic Knights were reorganizing, the Allies began to advance from the forest, unfurling their banners. Dozens of banners, Polish and Lithuanian, took up battle positions. The Polish heavy cavalry took the left flank, while the Lithuanian and Tatar light cavalry took the right. Infantry units and mercenaries took up positions in the center. Ulrich von Jungingen saw that the enemy had finally accepted battle. He was pleased. His knights took up their positions, and their artillery fired several volleys, which, however, did not cause much damage due to the rain that had fallen the day before. The two greatest armies of Eastern Europe stood still in anticipation. Battle was inevitable. This confrontation under the scorching sun was not just a wait. It was a battle of nerves, which the Grand Master lost even before the first clash. His arrogance with two swords did not work, and his tactical maneuvers only exhausted his own army. Do you think this gesture with the swords was a sign of bravery or a fatal mistake? In the next chapter, you will learn how the battle itself began and what plan the Allies had. The battle began around noon. The first to attack were the troops on the right flank of the Allied army. These were the regiments of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, under the personal command of the energetic Prince Vytautas. Along with them, the Tatar cavalry of Khan Jalal ad-Din also rushed into the attack. It was an avalanche of light horsemen who, with deafening cries, descended on the left flank of the Teutonic Order. This flank was commanded by one of the Order's best commanders, Grand Marshal Friedrich von Wallenrode. Under his command were selected knights and crossbowmen. They met the attack of the Lithuanians and Tatars with iron calm. The heavy armor and long spears of the Teutonic knights created a wall against which the first wave of attackers broke. Vytautas threw more and more troops into the battle. His warriors fought with great courage, trying to break through or bypass the enemy's formation. The Tatars showered the knights with a cloud of arrows, but the arrows did little damage to the high-quality European armor. A fierce confrontation began, in which the maneuverability and speed of light cavalry clashed with the indestructible armor and discipline of heavy cavalry. While Vytautas engaged the Order's left flank in battle, Polish banners stood still at the other end of the field. King Jagiello kept his main forces in reserve. He positioned himself on a hill from where he could see the entire battlefield and calmly observed what was happening. He waited for the right moment, not allowing his knights to engage in battle prematurely. Skirmishes also began on the left flank of the Allies, where the Poles were standing, and on the right flank of the Order. Czech mercenaries and Polish banners engaged in battle with the forces commanded by Grand Commander Kuno von Liechtenstein. Here, the battle was more positional in nature. The main events unfolded on the other, Lithuanian, flank. The battle on the Allies' right flank had already lasted about an hour. Despite all their bravery, Vytautas's light cavalry could not break through the ranks of von Wallenrode's heavy knights. The Teutonic knights slowly but surely began to squeeze the Lithuanian troops. Their iron wedge began to penetrate the ranks of the attackers, inflicting considerable damage. From the outside, it might have seemed that the Order's left flank was winning. The Lithuanian regiments began to waver under this relentless pressure. Casualties were mounting, and the knights' onslaught was growing stronger. It was at this moment, when the tension reached its peak, that the most interesting part began. Ulrich von Jungingen, watching the battle from the center, saw that his left flank was successfully pushing back the enemy. He was sure that the Lithuanians, whom he did not consider serious warriors anyway, were about to flee. This confidence was exactly what Jogaila and Vytautas had been counting on. In the chaos of battle, it was difficult to distinguish between tactical maneuvers and actual retreat. Vytautas's warriors were fighting to the limit of their strength, and their retreat under pressure from the Teutonic knights seemed perfectly natural. Marshal von Wallenrode, sensing imminent victory in his sector, intensified the attack. It was at this critical moment that Prince Vytautas gave the order. This order was not forward, but backward. The most risky and most ingenious part of the entire plan began: a feigned retreat. The Lithuanian and Tatar horsemen suddenly turned around and rushed to flee, creating the complete illusion of a panicked retreat. This was the moment that changed the entire war. When the Lithuanian and Tatar horsemen on the right flank suddenly turned to flee, victory cries rang out in the camp of the Teutonic Order. For the knights, this was a familiar sight. The pagans and half-Christians could not withstand the blow of true warriors and fled the battlefield in panic. Marshal von Wallenrode, intoxicated by success, ordered his knights to pursue the fleeing enemy. This was exactly the reaction Vytautas had been counting on. A false retreat is a classic tactic of the steppes, tried and tested many times by the Tatars and the Lithuanians themselves in battles in the east. But for European knights, raised on the idea of frontal assault and honest combat, such a maneuver was a sign of cowardice and defeat. They could not imagine that it was a trap. The heavy Teutonic banners on the left flank broke their tight formation and rushed in pursuit. They pursued the fugitives for several kilometers, further and further away from the main battlefield. They were confident that they were chasing a defeated enemy and sought to scatter them completely. Their ranks stretched out, discipline was broken, and their horses began to tire from the long ride. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, watching this triumph from his hill, made a second fatal decision. He saw that his left flank was winning, while the Polish center and right flank were still standing still. He decided that the moment had come to deliver a decisive blow to the Poles while their Lithuanian allies were fleeing. To build on his success and strike at the Polish troops, von Jungingen threw his reserves into battle, 16 select banners, the elite of the order. He led them in an attack on the right flank of the Polish army, which was now exposed after the Lithuanians had fled. He sought to outflank the Poles and strike them in the flank and rear. Thus, the entire army of the Teutonic Order was set in motion and lost its original monolithic formation. One part of it, carried away by the pursuit, broke away from the main forces by several kilometers. Another part, led by the master himself, performed a complex maneuver, exposing its own flank to the attack of the Polish reserves. At the same time, only 3 Smolensk regiments from Vytautas's army remained on the battlefield. They did not retreat with the rest. They remained to fight to the death, covering the flank of the Polish army. These regiments took the full brunt of the Teutonic Reserve's attack. They fought with desperate bravery, almost completely perishing, but accomplishing their task, they won precious time for the Poles. And then the trap snapped shut. Far away in the field, the Lithuanian and Tatar horsemen, who were being pursued by the Knights of von Wallenrode, suddenly turned around. Exhausted by the chase and spread out across the field, the Teutonic Knights found themselves face to face with a fresh and battle-ready enemy who had just been pretending to flee. At the same time, King Jogaila, seeing that von Jungingen had brought his reserves into battle and exposed his center, gave the order. The heavy Polish cavalry, which had been waiting in the forest, began its attack. It was a strike by fresh, full-strength knights against the already tired and stretched enemy formation. The Teutonic army was split into 2 parts, each of which was in mortal danger. Vytautas and Jogaila's plan worked perfectly. The arrogant knights, who fell for the simplest of tricks, destroyed their own invincible formation. Which of the Grand Master's decisions do you consider the biggest mistake? The pursuit or the introduction of reserves? In the next chapter, you will learn how the Polish cavalry exploited this advantage. Now that the trap was set, it was time to deliver the decisive blow. King Jogaila, who had been calmly watching the battle from a hill surrounded by his staff, saw the perfect moment. The Order's reserves, led by von Jungingen, were engaged in heavy fighting with the Smolensk regiments and began a maneuver to encircle the Polish flank. At that very moment, the king gave the order for a general attack. At his signal, fresh banners of Polish heavy cavalry emerged from the forest where they had been hiding. They emerged fresh banners of the Polish heavy cavalry. These were the elite of the Polish knighthood, dozens of detachments that had been eagerly awaiting this moment. Unfolding their banners, they descended like a united steel avalanche on the flank and center of the Teutonic army, which had been weakened by the departure of the master's reserves. The effect of this blow was stunning. The Teutonic knights, already engaged in battle and believing that the advantage was on their side, suddenly found themselves attacked by fresh, energetic opponents. The Polish knights crashed into their ranks, sweeping away everything in their path. What began was something the Order had never experienced before, a battle between equals in which the enemy had the advantage. At the same time, the second part of the drama was unfolding at the other end of the field. Vytautas's Lithuanian and Tatar horsemen, who had been fleeing so convincingly, suddenly turned around and attacked the knights of von Wallenrode who were pursuing them. Exhausted, scattered across the field and having lost their formation, the Teutonic knights were completely unprepared for the counterattack. This counterattack turned into a rout. Vytautas's light cavalry surrounded the disorganized troops of the Order, preventing them from regrouping. The knights, who had just felt like victors, found themselves trapped. They were cut off from their main army by several kilometers and were now being methodically destroyed. At that moment, chaotic fighting was raging on the main battlefield. The Polish reserve's attack was so powerful that the center of the Teutonic army faltered and began to disintegrate. At the most critical moment, one of the Polish banners broke through to the main banner of the Teutonic Order. After a short skirmish, the Order's great banner with a black cross fell to the ground. For a medieval army, the fall of the main banner was a sign of disaster. It meant the death or capture of the commander and complete defeat. Although the banner was quickly raised by the German knights, its fall caused panic and confusion in the ranks of the Order for several minutes. The knights' fighting spirit was broken. At that moment, King Jogaila brought his last reserves into battle. He threw everything he had into the fray. Seeing this, Ulrich von Jungingen realized that the battle was lost. His left flank was cut off and destroyed by Vytautas, and his center was crushed by the onslaught of fresh Polish forces. Realizing the horror of his situation, the Grand Master attempted a last desperate maneuver. He gathered around him the remnants of his best knights, those same 16 reserve banners, and attempted to break through the Polish ranks to attack King Jogaila himself. This maneuver was an act of desperation. Von Jungingen saw the royal banner on the hill and decided that eliminating the Polish monarch was his only chance to turn the tide of battle. He led his knights in a final, suicidal attack, straight into the heart of the Polish army. The desperate attack by Ulrich von Jungingen and his last reserves was the culmination of the entire battle. A group of elite knights led by the Grand Master himself fought their way through the Polish ranks, rushing straight towards the hill where King Jogaila was located. This was the Order's last gamble. If they managed to eliminate the king, the Allied army, deprived of its supreme commander, could be thrown into confusion. Jagiello was in grave danger, his personal guard prepared for battle. At one point, one of the Teutonic knights, Dippold von Köckeritz, broke through so close that he attacked the king himself. But the royal secretary, Zbigniew Olesnicki, who did not even have the title of knight, reacted in time and saved the king by knocking the knight out of his saddle. However, von Jungingen's group was not destined to break through to the king. They were immediately surrounded by the superior forces of the Polish knights. A short but fierce battle ensued. The Grand Master's detachment was too small to withstand the full might of the Polish army. One by one, the knights were pulled from their horses. Ulrich von Jungingen himself fought to the last. He was an outstanding warrior, but his enemies surrounded him in a tight circle. According to the chronicles, he was knocked out of the saddle and quickly neutralized. His death on the battlefield was the final nail in the coffin of the Teutonic Order. As soon as the news that the Grand Master had fallen spread across the field, the remnants of the Teutonic army finally lost the will to resist. Command of the troops was completely lost. Along with von Jungingen, other high-ranking members of the Order also fell. Grand Marshal Friedrich von Wallenrode, who was caught in Vytautas's trap, and Grand Commander Kuno von Liechtenstein. Virtually the entire leadership of the Teutonic Order, its entire high command, was eliminated in a single day. It was not just a military disaster, it was the decapitation of an entire state. Of the hundreds of senior knights who had arrived for the battle, only a few survived. The battle, which began as an orderly engagement, turned into a chaotic pursuit. The Teutonic knights, deprived of their commanders and banner, fled. But there was nowhere to run. On one side, they were pursued by Polish knights, and on the other, by the returning Lithuanians and Tatars of Vytautas, who now closed the circle of encirclement. Part of the Teutonic army attempted to retreat to their camp, which was fortified with carts modelled on the Hussite style. They hoped to organize a defense there. However, the Allied troops, inspired by their victory, did not allow them to do so. They broke into the Teutonic camp, and there the final act of the Order's tragedy unfolded. The camp's defenses were quickly broken. The enormous riches that the Order had brought with them became the trophies of the victors. The capture of the camp marked the final and complete defeat of the Teutonic army. The Poles and Lithuanians won a crushing victory. The plan, based on Jogailo's endurance and Vytautas's tactical cunning, worked flawlessly. Ulrich von Jungingen's arrogance and self-confidence led his army straight into a trap from which there was no escape. When the noise of battle died down in the evening, the field near Grunwald presented a horrific sight. The entire Teutonic army, considered invincible, ceased to exist as an organized force. Tens of thousands of soldiers were either killed or taken prisoner. The scale of the defeat was so great that contemporaries found it difficult to believe. The losses of the Teutonic Order were catastrophic, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of quality. Almost all of the senior leadership was killed. The Grand Master, the Grand Marshal, the Grand Commander, the Treasurer, and dozens of other high-ranking officials. The Order lost the cream of its knighthood, those experienced warrior monks who formed its core. Thousands of knights were taken prisoner, both brothers of the Order and guests, European aristocrats who had come to participate in the crusade. Their number was so great that the victors had difficulty accommodating them. These noble prisoners became an important asset. Huge ransoms were subsequently paid for them, which seriously undermined the Order's economy. The trophies captured in the Teutonic camp were innumerable. The Allies got not only the knights' personal belongings and treasury, but also all the artillery, the baggage train, and, most importantly, dozens of the Order's banners. These banners were sent to Krakow and Vilnius as the main symbol of triumph. The Allies also suffered losses, with the Smolensk regiments, who heroically covered the flank, and the Lithuanian troops, who took the brunt of the attack, suffering particularly heavy casualties. However, compared to the losses of the Order, the armies of Jogaila and Vytautas retained their combat effectiveness. They were victorious, and now the entire territory of the enemy state lay open before them. In the evening after the battle, King Jogaila and Prince Vytautas rode around the field. They ordered the bodies of the Order's highest-ranking officers, including Ulrich von Jungingen, to be carried with honors to their camp and then sent for Christian burial. This gesture of mercy towards the fallen enemy was intended to demonstrate the chivalrous nobility of the victors. News of the defeat at Grunwald spread throughout Europe with incredible speed. For many, it came as a shock. The invincible Teutonic Order, the stronghold of Catholicism in the East, had been crushed by an army that many in Europe still considered semi-pagan. This event completely changed the balance of power in the region. The Order's state was left defenseless. The army was gone, the leadership was destroyed, and the garrisons of the fortresses were small. The Allied army did not linger on the battlefield. After only 3 days, it moved on to its main goal, the capital of the Order, the impregnable fortress of Marienburg. The defeat at Grunwald was not just a lost battle. It was the end of an era when the Teutonic Order dictated its will to its neighbors by force. The trap, so ingeniously planned by Vytautas and Jogaila, snapped shut and destroyed not just the army, but the very foundation of the Order's power. Now the Allies faced their final task, to take the head of the enemy, its capital. The fall of Marienburg would mean the complete and final disappearance of the Teutonic Order from the map of Europe. A race against time began. Although the victory at Grunwald was crushing and became an important milestone in the history of Eastern Europe, the war was, of course, not over yet. The Allied army, having won a great victory, moved towards Marienburg, which was the capital of the Teutonic Order, expecting to continue its triumph. However, failure awaited them on this path. The defense of the fortress was led by Commander Heinrich von Plauen, a man who did not participate directly in the decisive battle at Grunwald. He managed to arrive in the capital before the Allies and, during this time, managed to organize an effective defense. Marienburg was one of the most modern and powerful fortifications of its time. The walls of this fortress were so strong and the defense so well organized that it was completely impossible to storm it without lengthy preparation and heavy siege artillery. A long 2-month siege began, during which the Allied army gradually lost its combat effectiveness. Despite the victory at Grunwald, problems began to take their toll. Soldier fatigue, disease epidemics, shortages of supplies and weapons, and constant discontent among the troops all undermined morale. At such moments, it becomes clear how important it is to have not only a strategy for victory, but also the ability to maintain the morale and physical readiness of the troops. Realizing that his main goal, to weaken the order and resolve the dispute over Samogitria, had been achieved, Prince Vytautas, despite his obvious success, decided to withdraw his troops. The Polish nobility, whose estates were left unprotected, also began to gradually disperse. As a result, when the Allied forces had already reached the limits of their capabilities, Jogaila, Grand Duke of Lithuania and King of Poland, was forced to lift the siege and retreat. The strategic success proved fleeting, and it seemed that the fruits of the great victory, despite all efforts, were slipping through their fingers. But the defeat at the siege of Marienburg did not change the overall outcome of the war. Nevertheless, despite all the difficulties, the Teutonic Order was broken. In 1411, the first Peace of Torun was signed, the terms of which, although still harsh for the Order, were nevertheless milder than they could have been. The Order, renouncing Samogitria in favor of Lithuania, was forced to pay a huge contribution to Poland for the ransom of its captive knights. This contribution became an unbearable burden for the Order, leaving its economy on the brink of collapse. The Order's ruined economy put it in an extremely difficult position. In order to raise funds to ransom the prisoners, it had to borrow money from European monarchs and impose taxes on its own cities, which caused mass discontent among the townspeople and knights. These internal problems were only exacerbated by the fact that the Order had lost its main resource, its people. It proved impossible to replace the loss of thousands of experienced knights. The Battle of Grunwald was not only a military disaster for the Order, but also an economic one, which made its continued existence extremely vulnerable. Subsequently, the Teutonic Order would never be able to regain its former power. The Battle of Grunwald itself became a symbol of the beginning of the end for the Teutonic Order. It would never recover from this blow. Shortly after the peace treaty was signed, the 13 Years' War began, a series of conflicts between Poland and the Order, during which the Order lost most of its territories. It became a vassal of the Polish king, and its political and military capabilities were sharply weakened. Its mission in the east was complete, and the Order became a mere shadow of its former glory. For Poland and Lithuania, the Battle of Grunwald was a turning point in their history. This victory not only strengthened their positions, but also marked the beginning of the golden age of the Polish-Lithuanian Union. The union of the two rulers, Jogaila and Vytautas, became the foundation of the future Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which became the dominant power in Eastern Europe for several centuries. It was not just a strategic alliance, but an important step towards strengthening the Slavic peoples and creating a new political entity that influenced the whole of Europe. The Battle of Grunwald went down in history as a classic example of how strategy and tactics can defeat brute force. Vytautas's feigned retreat and Jogaila's cool-headed use of his reserves became a model of military art that is still studied in military academies today. It was not just a victory on the battlefield, it was a victory on a strategic and tactical level, which determined the political map of the region for many years and strengthened confidence in the Slavic forces. The significance of the Battle of Grunwald cannot be overestimated. This victory was not only a military triumph, but also a symbol of resistance to German expansion to the east. It showed that the united forces of the Slavic peoples, despite numerous difficulties, were capable of resisting any threat. The two swords sent by von Jungingen as a symbol of mockery and confidence in his victory became a prophetic symbol of his own demise and the fall of the Teutonic Order. This irony, in which the symbol of the order was used against it, became yet another reminder of how carelessness and arrogance can lead to the downfall of even the most powerful states. Today, the Battle of Grunwald remains one of the most important events in the history of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. This event serves as a reminder that even the most powerful enemies, obsessed with pride and self-confidence, can be defeated if unity, intelligence, and determination stand against them. Grunwald has become a symbol of how strength of spirit and the union of nations can change the course of history, and the victory won here continues to live on in the memory of generations as an important lesson. We have come all the way from the secret preparations of the Allies to the complete defeat of the Teutonic Order on the field of Grunwald. This battle is not just a story about the clash of two armies. It is a drama about how arrogance and self-confidence were punished, and military cunning and iron endurance brought one of the most resounding victories in medieval history. The trap planned by Jogaila and Vytautas worked perfectly. They forced the invincible knights to play by their rules, lured them out of their impregnable fortresses, exhausted them on the march, and provoked them into making fatal mistakes. Grunwald was not just a defeat for the Order. It was the end of its power as a great power. The history of Grunwald teaches us that in any war, it is not only the one with the strongest armor who wins, but also the one with the sharpest mind. What other great battles of the past, where cunning played a decisive role, would you like to see in our future videos? Suggest your topics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.